On today's show, we'll be joined by Jalen Green's former head coach, Joey Fuca, to discuss how Jalen has adjusted to the overall NBA game, expectations for him heading into year 2, and much, much more. All of that coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as Rockets Watch. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Joining us now is Jalen Green's former head coach, Joey Fuca, who you can follow on Twitter at Coach Fuca. Coach, it's a ton of fun to have you back here on the program. We had you on once before Jalen Green was even wearing Rockets red, kind of, exploring what he was like as a player, what the Houston Rockets may have been getting themselves into before drafting him. And it's really exciting to have you back on the program to kind of revisit where Jalen is at now, after his rookie season has concluded. We're, less than a week out from the start of his second campaign here in Houston. So it's going to be a ton of fun to kind of see how Jalen has grown from when you had him to throughout the first campaign, and kind of where he's going, what lies in store for his future as an NBA player.
Yeah, well, Jackson, thanks for having me on again. I'm a big fan of your show and big fan of what you do for the Rockets. And obviously, I'm a Rockets fan now with Jalen on the team. But no, it's great to reconnect with you. And I've kind of saw this vision after coaching Jalen just for 1 year in high school. But I knew, when all the skeptics were out about, where he was going and where he was headed. I knew where he was going just because I've been around him so much, but I got a chance to run his summer camp this year and got a chance to see him his rookie year and just want to chat with you about how he's preparing for this year and how the upcoming season is going to go for the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, and you know what? And I will ask later on. We're not going to start with it, but later on, I will ask you about how some of the skeptics have responded to Jalen Green, some of the national media pundits. We're definitely going to get into that, but I don't want to lead with it. What I want to start with is just, how have you seen him kind of adjusting throughout last season, right? Because I want to revisit a little bit of last season before we kind of dive and move forward into what he's worked on this offseason, what your kind of expectations are for him this year, maybe a year 2 leap, that kind of thing. But how have you seen him kind of adjust and evolve his game throughout that first rookie season?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously as Rockets fans, you guys are excited the way the season ended. But from my viewpoint, he, from a maturity standpoint, I think he just learned the different ornaments of the game, right? Your physicality, the speed, the maturity, the different things that you have to learn as a 19-year-old that's in the NBA. And so I think that was one thing that I saw from Jalen that just took off, right? And he's learning from other guys on the team that are also younger. And then you have a couple veterans on that team that were able to show him, like EG and some of those other guys. So I think, from the maturity standpoint, Jalen's done an incredible job off the court on just learning just different things, right? Preparing your body for an 82-game season. I think you've seen some of the pictures now that he's even hitting the weight rooms after these, preseason games. So I think, he's just the approach to the game, right, Jackson? I think there's a lot of things that just as young men are just trying to get to that level of being a full professional. I think that was the biggest maturity step that's off the court. And then I think obviously on the court, like there's different things that he's working on, right? I mean, I think that the speed of the game, learning how to play in the different sets that your coaches are putting him in, learning the physicality of the game, being able to finish with contact, being able to get to the free throw line. I think his stat last year was, top 5 in the NBA about getting to the free throw line. So I think those are the different things that we're seeing in his game. But I think, like I said, I think the biggest thing was seeing him off the court with his maturity standpoint.
And Jalen off the court, right? Because you've been somebody who's been close to him. You're still close to him. Like, just he's one of those guys, right? He has that drive, right? That intensity about him of wanting to improve his game, which is tough to find, right? Because sometimes you got guys with all the skills in the world, right? All the talent, all the athleticism, whatever in the world, but they don't have the drive to want to improve themselves, to want to be the best. But that's something that we have consistently heard about Jalen throughout before he became a Rocket, during the pre-draft process, even throughout his rookie campaign, just how hard he works to put in the effort to try and improve his game.
Mm-hmm. Jalen's always been a workhorse. He's always been a guy that's approached the game as if every time he steps on the floor to be his last. And I think that he's had that approach now seep into all different facets, right? Whether it's watching film, whether it's hitting the weight room, whether it's post-game conditioning on how to take care of your body. So I think he's really had that approach. And, as Rocket fans, sometimes it's hard too to learn the maturity that it takes, right? Like it's immediately always as fans, we want the results to be here and now. But I think for him and actually the whole team, they're all learning, right? And sometimes that's challenging. But I think from Jalen's point of view, I've always been really intrigued by just his approach to the game and his approach to continue to get better. And you're right, Jackson, a lot of these guys are super talented, they're super skilled, but really the separating factor is how can you get better from your rookie season to the second season and to the third season. I think that for Jalen right now, you're going to start to see some really good things.
And before we dive into kind of some of the stuff that he's been working on, this offseason, things that he's working to get better at going into year two, just what if we can revisit, when you had Jalen, right, when you were coaching him, what was he like as a leader? Because I think maybe there's this, he does kind of strike me as a little bit, I don't want to say introverted, it's not the right word, but maybe in a media capacity when we're sitting down kind of interviewing him in some of the scrums, he does come off a little guarded at times. Yeah. And I think he's loosened up a little bit, through training camp year two. Yeah. But what was he like as a vocal leader with you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that I was asked that a lot during the NBA draft process from multiple scouts. Was that as how was he a leader? And Jalen, that was one of the things me and him sat down early in the season. We had a good conversation about him being more of a vocal leader because I think he's always been somebody. I mean, especially in high school when these guys are in high school, it's easier for them, right? Just from a sheer skill standpoint, he's just better than a lot of guys, right? But I think from that alone, everybody just followed Jalen because he was just better than everybody. But my thing was challenging him to be more of a vocal leader. And I think that you guys are starting to see that. It was funny this summer when I was running his camp. I had him get on the microphone a few times in front of, he had 200-300 kids there at camp, and he brought Scotty Barnes and a few of his other buddies to the camp. And I got him on the mic a few different times, and opposed to his rookie season, he came up to me and said, "Man, coach, I'm getting more comfortable speaking in front of people." I said, "Yeah, that's because you're becoming more confident with it." Right. So that's, for me, it's great to see that because Jalen is, I think with the media, I think he likes being around other people and speaking. It's just sometimes being comfortable, you know what I mean? And having the confidence to do that. And you guys will start to see him open up a little bit here.
Coming up, we're going to talk about Jalen Green's improvements heading into year two, some of the stuff that really stands out of what he's able to do on the court now compared to his rookie season. We're going to get there in just one moment after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your football betting info and odds this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every single game that you can get your hands on. But you can also get basketball odds over at BetOnline. Right now, you can take a look at who the odds-on favorites are to win this year's NBA championship. The Golden State Warriors, unfortunately, sitting at the top of the pack, plus 575. Boston Celtics behind them at plus 650, slipping a little bit further. The Milwaukee Bucks at plus 700. And rounding out the top five, you have the Brooklyn Nets and the LA Clippers at plus 750 apiece. So for all of that and more odds, head over to betonline.net to learn more about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Coach, when we're looking at Jalen, what were some of the things that that he kind of prioritized and focused on this offseason to try and, work on his game, kind of elevate to that next level heading into his sophomore campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a statistical standpoint, I mean, you looked at, the three ball was at 34, and I think that was something that, we would like to get up, right? I think the high 30s, low 40s would be great. That's the target point. He did shoot a lot of threes last year, which is great because I think the Rockets like to play fast. So I think that was one area of focus was the three ball, whether it's catch and shoot, off the dribble, pin down. So we I've known his trainers. I've known a lot of the guys that worked with him this summer and off season on making sure we continue to get that 3 ball up. And then I think just, the decision-making, right? Just continuing, anytime you're a rookie, you're just learning, right? You're understanding your sets and you're understanding how your coach wants to play. And so I think that, the first one was the 3 ball. The second one, he shot 80% from the line, which I think is a good number. He got to the line a lot last year. And so this year we're even targeting to get to mid 80s. And then, like I said, just the continual decision-making. I think from a ball screen perspective, he always hits guys in the right spots. He's always looking to get others involved. And then, with the personnel that you guys added in the draft class, that's just going to be able to extend the floor even more with Jaden, because he can be able to shoot the 3. And then obviously with Tari being kind of a glue X factor guy, he's a guy that can run in transition. So I think everybody that I've known always likes playing with Jalen. I know that I'll continue to do so.
Yeah. And it feels kind of like, one of the other areas that really did stand out is he got to the line a steady amount, like in his rookie campaign, but it felt like there were a lot of times where he would drive the ball and, not get a favorable whistle, maybe, the rookie treatment, whatever. Yeah. And even at times, maybe kind of shying away a little bit from the contact sometimes just because, trying to find ways to finish. That's been like, one of the areas that I've noticed of his game, at least through a handful of preseason games now, is he's driving with so much aggression, really looking to initiate the contact, take the bump, trying to finish over the defender, and he's been fantastic from the line through 3 preseason games.
Yeah, I think if you see, Jalen has always been very good at north-south, so always being able to continue to put defense on their heels. And I think that's one of the things you talked about, Jackson, is just having the ability to put your head down and drive and be able to finish with contact at somebody's chest. And then the other thing is being able to create separation, right? I think the shot you saw against the Heat the other night, being able to step back, being able to stop on a dime and, be able to hit that 15-footer where it's really a consistent shot for him. If he can start finishing with contact in the paint, then it's going to open up everything else. So I think you touched on a good thing that is definitely something that needs to continue to work on, is just being able to finish with contact.
The one area that has been, because there's not many areas that I can look at Jalen's game and be like, man, I'm really disappointed in this. And it may be small, maybe I'm overblowing it, and maybe you can shed some light on it, is it feels like he has that insane, like, explosive first step, right? Just, he can get by almost any defender one-on-one at will, it seems like. But there are times when he does that and he gets past the defender and he's flying so fast to the rim that it's almost like he's not able to decelerate quick enough to get the ball off the glass properly. And like the other night against the Heat, he was 2 for 8 inside the 3-point line, and he had some bunnies right there at the rim where he did all the hard work, broke down the defender, got to the rim, but wasn't able to have the touch around the rim. And I think I see a part of that is, again, he's so quick, so fast that he's got to get to that deceleration to be able to finish those plays.
Yeah, I think he's, that's another area, right? That mid-range, being able, that gray area of like, do I shoot a floater? Do I get all the way to the rim? Do I shoot a step back? So I think that's just adding to his bag, right? I think that Jalen, in that mid-range area, it's nice to have all that athleticism, but sometimes you're like, man, do I get all the way to the rim or do I be able to finish? So I think being able to finish with both hands as well. I think that, working on his left hand, in that area of that floater, right? I think that's a big shot for him. And he knows that, that we've worked with that. We worked really hard at that in-between game, right? Between if defenders run you off the 3-point line, and then there's the second line of defense where you've got those big 7-footers that you have to either go at them or be able to finish right in that mid-range area. So that's a good point.
And I'm glad you brought up, kind of the reads, the playmaking side of his game, because I really do feel like he still, for whatever reason, is an underrated playmaker, because especially like, this year, through a handful of preseason games, feels like he's really tightened up the handle a little bit. Feels like he's able to navigate those high pick and rolls, the screen and roll, sets with a lot more confidence, kind of waiting, reading, reacting to whatever the defense does. And his ability to hit, his teammates and to make those right reads, that to me is like the next really big step in his evolution as a player, because we know he's a bucket. He can pretty much score at will at all 3 levels, but him being able to be that potentially at times a primary facilitator is going to unlock a lot for his game.
Yeah, I think if you looked at, the Rockets last year, I think they were kind of searching for an identity at that point guard position. And then, obviously Scoot, took a little bit of a priority on that. But I think this year, if you watch their preseason games, Jalen's taken a little bit of that. And I think that that'll help you guys as an organization, because Jalen can play point. My senior year, we don't have as much talent as an NBA team, but we did have other guys that are high level players. And I think that, Jalen really liked taking on that ownership of being a point guard, but more so just being able to be a facilitator for other people. Jalen really does like getting others involved because Jalen's a winner and he wants to win, and he'll do whatever it takes to do that. And I think with Scoot, Scoot likes to be on the ball a lot, but I think if he can help Scoot take off the ball, that'll be a helpful thing for the organization, because Jalen at the point guard and having Scoot and these other guys on the wing being able to fly with him will just pose a bigger threat for you guys offensively.
That was something, and you kind of talking about it right there. Do you envision Jalen as solely a true two guard, or do you think there is a future potentially where maybe he's not labeled as a point guard per se, but kind of maybe one of those primary ball handler guys where, like a Luka, like a James Harden, where he's running a majority of the offense at some point in his career?
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily label people as one specific position, because when you have guys like Jalen, these guys that, that are multifaceted and they're multi-skilled, they can play multiple positions. I do think it just depends on your personnel, right? I mean, if you're, like the Rockets, for example, I mean, Jalen can play, he can be a facilitator, whereas other organizations that have solely a strictly a point guard, that's their guy. That doesn't mean that Jalen can't be that backup point guard when he subs out, right? So I think for him, his growth right now is at that shooting guard position, but that doesn't mean he can't play the 1 or the 3. I mean, there's gonna be lineups this year where you guys have, there's injuries, there's guys that have to step up, or there's guys that are smaller like Ty or Jae'Sean that are going to have to play kind of that 1 position and may move to Scoot to the 2 and may have Jalen at the 3. I mean, I think that's a lineup too, with even Tari, being able to have the ability to play the 4 or the 5. I mean, because he rebounds at a high clip now. So now when you're playing smaller and faster, so there's the ability, for Jalen to play multiple positions. And yeah, would love to. If he could play the 1, that'd be great.
Coming up, we're going to talk about expectations and goals for Jalen Green for this upcoming season, his second NBA campaign. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Coach, I think one of the best things that we heard out of Media Day was, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but when asked about goals for this season, Jalen was basically like, he said a very simple kind of line, but when you kind of expand on it, it's really cool to try and see what he was really going for. He said, carry my team to more wins and make an all-star team. And I loved that he said, carry my team. Like he's got this, like, it's his identity. He's like, I'm gonna carry them. Yeah. Like that's the mentality, carry. And he said, my team. And I loved hearing that out of him at Media Day.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's part of you guys seeing the maturity that I talked about earlier. I think that he's becoming more comfortable with it. He's becoming more confident with it. And I think that you guys as fans, as an organization, are going to start to see that more often. And like you said, I mean, I think him being able to take authority of that is a great sign. But it also starts at the top, right? I think, your GM to the head coach to then, one of your best players, that there needs to be that communication stream, right? And then, if everybody's aligned with that, then everybody on the team can be aligned with that, right? So I think that those are the goals. And like I said earlier, Jalen's a winner. I mean, he's always been a winner. He's going to do whatever it takes to become a winner. And then, the individual notoriety about an all-star game, that's great. But I think if you actually ask him that, I think that winning would be more of a priority than making an all-star game.
Yeah. And it feels like he and Jabari are kind of cut from the same cloth, where you hear him talk about wanting to win. And yeah. Nobody would blame either of these two guys, right? Second overall pick, third overall pick, for having a bit more of some self-centered attitude. Well, like, I think I can do this, and me. And it's like, they're not like that. They're just very two unselfish guys who want to just pour in the work and achieve at the highest level. And again, all of it comes down to, we want to win, right? That seems to be the same consensus message across the board for all these guys. And the other message is they all want to play hard, right? To me, this Rockets team, with the guys that they have on this squad, you talked about it a little bit earlier, right? They're going to get out and run. They're going to play with pace, transition, and they're going to be hell to play against every single team in the NBA. All 29 other teams are going to look at their calendar, and they're going to see the Rockets and be like, damn, we don't want to play against the Rockets.
Yeah. No, I think that's for sure. I think, when you look at the NBA as a whole, I mean, you've got teams that are obviously just more experienced, more skilled, and what you're going to get out of them. But then you have teams like the Rockets that it's not an easy out. I mean, you're going to have that next batch of teams that are all kind of gunning for those last, kind of playoff spots, quote unquote. And I think, the Rockets last year learned a lot of things that we talked about earlier, and they've made some adjustments with their transactions, on their depth chart. But then have also, they've added a couple of really good pieces in the draft. And I think that those, the Rockets they're a tough out, and especially with the young, quick legs. And I think that they're going to have, like we talked about earlier, but the media, I think that they're just a fun team, and I think that the team they're all going to build morale. There's going to be some bumps in the road for sure. When you go on those long 6, 7, 8 game road trips, but then when you come back home and you kind of regroup, I think the Rockets are definitely somebody that you have to take a look at this year.
And what are you specifically hoping to see out of year 2 from Jalen Green? Any specific growth in any specific element of his game or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Jalen, personally, we talked about it earlier. I just think the maturity thing, right? I think that being able to take that next step. I mean, statistically, there's some things that I'd like to see, right? I'd like to improve his 3-point percentage. I'd like to get him to be able to shoot a little bit higher clip from the 2, like we talked about. But I do think that from a team perspective, you're going to start to see that, the winning is a byproduct of all the other things that you guys, are doing. Right. And I think that, for Jalen specifically, I mean, you touched on it, like, I would like to see him take more ownership of the team. Right. And like to see him, take ownership of the victories, but also the losses too, and be able to learn from that and be able to regroup. And hey, man, if we can double our wins from last year, that would be a huge goal.
that might be a tall mountain to climb. I'm shooting for somewhere. I'm shooting for a leveled improvement. Like give me 25 to 30, and kind of like the moving the right direction.
There you go.
And I'll be good.
There you go.
I'm really optimistic to see how he continues to improve defensively, because I think. Yeah. The way he started his rookie campaign, I don't think it's, he was not a great defender to start his rookie year. He was adjusting to learning NBA schemes, where to be, when to rotate, all that stuff. But he worked really hard at it and got to a place where like Steven Silas, Jae'Sean Tate, these guys were like praising him as the year went along, saying he knows his spots now, went through walkthrough, was in every right spot, going through walkthroughs pregame, that kind of stuff. And that's another element of like, he puts in the work, right? You could be all talk and just talking, just focused on offense, right? Yeah, I'm a bucket. I do all this offensively. Yeah. But Jalen's also talked extensively about wanting to be a two-way presence, wanting to be impactful on the defensive end. And that's great to hear from one of your leaders on the team.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because there are two sides of the ball. And, he's always been a willing defender, a willing and able defender. But it's just not as consistent, right? And I think that part of it is learning, how to become more physical and how to be, like you said, in the right position, and learning the different schemes that you have against different teams every night. Because there's going to be you're going to have different personnel. We're playing against Giannis or LeBron James, right? And so, his position specifically, I mean, when you're at shooting guard in the NBA, you're guarding some of the best players in the NBA, right? And so I think learning that, right, is just a curve in itself. And I think that's a big thing for him this year, and I'm glad you touched on that, because the defensive side, even if you listen to Coach Lucas and his post-game interviews, like, him and then also everybody else will gravitate towards how he's playing, and it'll become second nature for some of these guys. So that's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm again really excited to see what he's able to continue to grow on that side of the basketball as well, because we know he's got one of the deepest offensive bags, and that's going to continue to get better as well. But last thing I got for you here, Coach, I think just what are your thoughts on this kind of the national media label that seems to have unfortunately been attached to Jalen Green, empty stats, empty calories player, which again, along with that comes the label of maybe some selfishness and whatever, which we talked about earlier, how just unselfish he is as a player. It's really unfortunate, because it feels like every couple of years or so there's guys that get this label stuck to them when they're on kind of on a team that's on the upswing, right? The Rockets have had the worst record back-to-back seasons, but they're rebuilding. That's kind of to be expected. But Trae Young had the same thing happen to him before the Hawks started winning. Yeah. Devin Booker had the same thing happen to him in Phoenix. And it's just kind of frustrating to see national pundits kind of stick this label on somebody every couple of years.
I think you're always going to have critics, right? I mean, I think that, every year there's going to be, like you said, a scapegoat for that. And, unfortunately, that's part of it. I mean, if you hear Jalen in his interviews too, like, he's aware of that. I mean, these guys are on social media. They know what's going on, but that doesn't faze him. I mean, you look at some of the NBA rookies last year. I mean, you could say the same thing about Cade Cunningham on a team that's, struggling as well. But I think, that's just added motivation. Jalen has never been somebody that's been rattled about getting labeled, or in fact, it just adds more, right? It just adds more fuel to the fire. And, I think for the Rockets, I mean, that's where their organization's at right now. And unfortunately, somebody's got to take the fall for that. And in this case, it's Jalen, right? And I think that over the course of time, right, he'll prove that wrong, and we'll all get to see that. And, me and you are on the same page about that. But I mean, there's always going to be people out there that are critical, and it is what it's the lay of the land.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, but again, I've seen enough of Jalen, and I know obviously you know him, much closer than I do, and you're also watching all these games, and I don't know how anybody can watch Jalen, more than just a 5-game sample size or something and not see that this kid has future star potential written all over him. But Coach, anything else you want to chime in here before we wrap things up? Give you open mic access if there's anything we didn't hit on that you want to make sure Rockets fans know.
Thanks for having me, Jackson. I've always loved catching up with you and learning a little bit more about the organization on the back end, because I know that you hear a ton of stuff. And obviously I've been around Jalen enough to know that kind of what's going on in the direction of the team. And I'm really excited about year 2 for him, and then just as an organization, the direction you guys are headed. And I've got a couple friends that are on the staff. Rick Higgins is one of my buddies that I grew up with in the Bay Area. And so I know a few different people that I'm hearing it from a couple different sources. So it's great to catch up, and excited for year 2.
Rick's a great guy. I love him. He might not love me as much. No, I kid. Rick actually likes me, even though he pretends he hates me. But yeah, Joey, always a pleasure to have you on the show, man. Thanks for stopping by.
Awesome, man.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked on Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also on YouTube, so just go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.